Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and today I'm going to bring you a review of one of those special tanks in the game. You know, those tanks that have a bit of character but are frankly a little bit odd. Here we have the TOG 2. So, historically, the TOG project was a bunch of guys who designed tanks for the First World War getting together and trying to design a vehicle that they envisaged would be useful in the Second World War. That was the idea. And so a lot of the design philosophies of tanks in the First World War were input into the TOG project. TOG stands for the Old Gang. Hence you can see they were, old tank designers from the First World War. And they designed what was the TOG 1, which was a very long, very heavy tank with a couple of 2-pounder guns on sort of little turrets, had a large hull-mounted 17-pounder field gun, and was designed to drive straight across trench networks. Hence, it was a very, very long machine. Now, this was deemed to be unsatisfactory for a modern warfare, and so this design was developed into the TOG 2, of which a single prototype was designed and can actually be seen at the Bovington Tank Museum. So TOG 2 basically changed the track runners. So in TOG 1 design, the top return runners of the tracks went over the hull of the tank, above the doors, much like it did in the old World War I Mark I tanks. In this design, they decided to reduce the running height of the tracks so that the door was over them on the side. They also ditched the 2-pounder guns and moved the 17-pounder from the hull into a turret. And thus you have the TOG 2. Don't ask me in-game what the asterisk means. I don't actually know. If anyone knows why there's an asterisk after it, after the name, by all means, please feel free to mention in the comments. But anyway, this is the TOG 2. So, what do you get? Oh, sorry, I should quickly finish off with my historical introduction. The thing I find really interesting about this project is that it was designed with World War tank concepts in mind for World War II, despite the fact that combat toward the end of the First World War had moved away from trench warfare. It looked much more like the combat that would happen at the opening of the Second World War. It was much more mobile. The troops were much less regimented. It was more of a skirmish formation. It looked much more like what we would consider a modern war. We would recognise these modern fighting forces in this sort of more combined arms approach. So by the time that the old gang got together and thought they were going to make this thing, frankly, what they were building was already obsolete before they had started coming up with this idea. So by the time they actually finished a prototype for testing, which was in the 40s, something like 1942, 43, this thing was woefully outdated and had absolutely no place on a modern battlefield. Combine that with the success of the British heavy tank project, the Churchill programme, the Churchill tanks, the relative success of the Churchill tanks anyway, and there was really no need for this tank. It was a complete, 80-something ton waste of time. But that's what I find interesting. It's not just that it became outdated as the design progressed and technology moved on. It was outdated when they started. This was never ever going to be a successful design, no matter what they did to it. But, I don't know, there we go, people are funny. So, enough about history. What do we have in game? Well, there are several things about this tank that should stand out. One, it's huge! Look at it! In fact, the TOG 2 is the longest tank in the game. It is longer than a mouse. Or a T-95 or any of those big old long machines. It is the longest tank in the game. It is a Tier 6 heavy tank that sees preferential matchmaking, i.e. it will never fight against Tier 8 tanks unless you platoon up with someone in a regular Tier 6. Which is interesting because usually when a tank is in that position, it's because the gun is cruddy. And the gun is not cruddy on this, but we'll get onto that in a sec. So, 1400 hit points. Let's just rewind a second. This is at Tier 6, where you've got the KV-1S with just over 800 hit points. 1400 hit points is more than most Tier 7 heavy tanks. It's like a Tier 8. It's more than a lot of Tier 8 medium tanks. I mean, it's almost as much as a fully upgraded Tiger. Jesus Christ, that's a lot. So it's got a lot of health. It weighs, well, my TOG weighs 83.18 tons. It's a heavy beast. If you can ram people with this, it's hilarious, or more likely, as we'll get onto, if people ram themselves on you. 600 horsepower, however, I'm afraid does not give this particularly good acceleration. I mean, you're looking at less than 10 horsepower per ton, quite considerably less. But then it doesn't have far to accelerate to, as its speed is limited at 14 kilometers an hour. Yes, that's right, 14. And that's not a reverse speed, that's going forwards. It is the second slowest tank in the game, to the best of my knowledge, behind the T-95. Traverse speed is pretty garbage at 20 degrees a second. The hull armour looks okay on paper. 76 on the front, 76 on the sides, 50 on the rear, and on the turret, 114, 76, 53. But a lot of it is flat, but we're going to get onto the armour a bit later. But at this point in time, I would just like to note the armour on this tank is not fantastic, and a lot of the time you will be tanking with your health, which you have a lot of. We'll get onto the gun stats in a moment. Turret traverse is 32 degrees, which isn't actually terrible. View range 360, which is alright. Signal range 570, which is pretty typical for these kind of mid-tier British tanks and their slightly cruddy radios. So, this tank has a lot of health, the armour is mediocre, and it's really, really slow. Oh, and it's the size of the state of New York. So, what's it actually good for? I mean, it can soak up a lot of damage because of its health, but it's not going to bounce many shots because of its armour. Interesting. Okay. Well, we've looked at mobility, which is bad. We're going to look at armour in more detail in a second, but what about the gun? Well, the gun on this thing is interesting. Oh, that guy just keeps popping up over the gun stats, which is annoying. This is the gun. The Ordnance Quick Firing 17-pounder gun Mark 7. It's a 17-pounder. So what you get is basically a 76mm gun, okay, fires 12 rounds a minute, that's pretty good. Average pen of 171, that's quite nice. In fact, let's just think about that. 171, that's like the same as a KV-1S, basically, very similar. But it doesn't see tier 8 games. Sweet. 150 average damage, which is okay, I mean it's a 76mm gun. 0.36 dispersion at 100 meters, which is alright, but nothing to get too excited about. It's okay, it's the same as the Churchill one. 2.3 aim time, which again is okay. If you want to load high explosive, you get 38 pen, 190 average damage, and if you do want to fire some APCR, although you very rarely, if ever, need to. I mean, you can see I've got 5 rounds loaded, but you get 239 average pen. So the gun's good. And you carry a butt ton of ammo. I mean, you'd like to think you carry a lot of ammo in a tank this big, but you do carry an awful lot of ammunition. Okay, sweet. So, the tank basically is slow, poorly armoured, a lot of health, with a really good gun. This is one of those tanks that likes to be in a platoon. A single TOG on its own is, if we're honest, not a particularly good tank. A platoon of 3 TOGs is freaking hilarious. I just roll forwards. It's so much health for people to chew through. And between you, you are then putting out 36 76mm rounds a minute. That's terrifying. It's hilarious. You know, you don't get many opportunities to do it, but it is hilarious. But I even enjoy this in single player, solo games, and that's most of my games in this tank. So what about crew skills? Well, crew skills are kind of irrelevant because if you've got any sense, you'll just put your British heavy tank crew in this. Remember, this is a premium tank, so you can transfer crew into it from the same nation and vehicle type with no penalty. So you can see here that my commander, gunner, driver, and loader are all from my Carnarvon. My radio operator is left over from my Black Prince, and my second loader, is actually native to this tank. He's the only guy who was actually trained on this tank. So crew skills are standard fare, but I'm not going to talk about them because you won't have a dedicated crew for this tank if you've got any sense. Equipment, however, I will talk about. So, what would I recommend? Well, this is a massive artillery target, so I would recommend a super heavy spall liner. And because of the weight of this tank, yes, you do get super heavy spall liner. It's not cheap, it's 750,000 credits, but if you buy the equipment when it's on discount, it's not too bad. It gives you 50% armor protection from ramming and explosions, and while you're not going to be ramming many people in this, occasionally people ram you, which is really funny. And 50% to protection of the crew from injuries. The main reason you want it though is that explosions part, i.e. artillery, and this is a massive slow target. So I would recommend the super heavy sport liner. I would also recommend the medium caliber tank gun rammer, simply because, well, more rate of fire is better. Camo net, have you seen the size of this thing? Who cares about its camo rating? You're gonna be seen. Wet ammo rack, I haven't noticed any ammo rack problems. Binocular telescopes, you should almost always be on the move in this tank. You are so slow you need to keep up with the battle, so binos aren't very useful. Coated optics, well, yeah, you could, but it doesn't make your view range that good. Enhanced gun laying drive, yeah, again, you could, but I probably wouldn't bother. I think you're better off picking something else. Vertical coil springs, waste of time. Fill tanks with CO2, nah, don't bother. You could make a case for a toolbox to put the tracks on faster, but I have improved vents. So I have super heavy sport liner, improved vents, and gun rammer. You could swap out the vents, for a toolbox. If you wanted, you could swap out the sport liner for a toolbox, I guess, or maybe an enhanced gun laying drive, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And that is the equipment I run on this. Consumables, I've just got your standard trio of consumables. And I will note at this junction that the TOG is actually not a bad little money maker at tier 6. It's quite good. The ammunition's pretty damn cheap, and you can rack up a decent amount of damage, you know, a respectable rate, so it's not a bad money maker. But this is not a tank for you to buy just to try out. I wouldn't recommend this tank unless you A, have a British heavy tank crew already, and B, you want something a little bit different. If you hate slow machines, well, you're going to hate a lot of the British heavy tank line anyway, but don't get this. This is really, really slow. Yeah. So, having said all that, let's just get onto the armor, then into some gameplay. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about the grind on this thing. There is no grind. I will, however, briefly mention the price. So if you just buy this straight from the tech tree, it is 3,500 gold. Which is not too bad, but it's the sort of tank you only really buy because you really want it. If you're unsure, try it on the test server. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you buying it. So let's have a look at the armor scheme. No upgrade path, as I said, because this is a premium tank, you get what you get. So let's have a look at the armor. So let's have a wee look at the armor scheme of this tank, shall we? Before we get on to that, one thing I forgot to mention in the garage earlier on is that this tank has 10 degrees of gun depression. Ooh, yeah, that's quite nice. Now, do be a little bit careful. It doesn't really have the turret armor to back that up, but 10 degrees of gun depression is quite nice and gives it an element of flexibility that it may not otherwise have. So, armor. Now, let's see what we've actually got here. Okay, let's start off with the turret. So the turret is 114mm from the front, but that is only this very frontal plate, if you can see that section there. It is not the whole turret front. These parts are counted as side armor. So that's 114 millimeters of armor. There is a very small internal gun mantlet in various parts, but it's not something to be relied upon, and so realistically you're going to be getting armor values of somewhere around the 120 mark on a lot of that part of the turret. Go to the sides and you're down to 76mm of armor, but with the sloping that's effectively about 100. So you're looking at turret armor of 120, 100mm, something of that order from the front. From the sides it's just 76 with some bits that are slightly better angled, and from the rear it's garbage. The front of the hull, well, on paper it's 76mm, and most of it is 76mm. But, you know, there's only this bottom part is actually sloped. So this goes up to effectively 87, the rest is 76, and there's even weak spots, 64, 64, and they correspond to sort of these hatches, machine gun ports, you know, these obvious sections here. So basically, if you have a gun with 100mm of penetration and more, you're almost guaranteed to pen the front of the hull of the TOG. Side armor, well, is 76. Apart from the bits that aren't. 64, 64, which are this very rear section and this sort of driver's hatchway area. Now there is a strip of spaced armor running along here, which is quite nice at 64mm. And so as a result, if your shot goes a little bit low, what you find is that suddenly you're looking at armor values of over 200. Or if we look at it flat on, about 200. Sorry about that. And the tracks, well, they're tracks. They offer a bit of spaced armor. But interesting to note, it is possible to put shots into this really weak section of armor here. Not that you really need to worry about doing that, but it is theoretically possible to do. Now from the rear it gets kind of interesting, because this is nominally 51mm thick. 51, 51, 51, but there's some sloping going on. And so, depending on the angle at which people are shooting you, your bum, bits of your bum, can be an auto-bounce zone. What this means is that if someone is behind you, don't try and turn your tank around to face them, because what you will do is slowly turn around, present them with your entire vulnerable side that they'll just pepper full of fire, and then eventually you'll show them your front. Just angle your rear and turn your turret. And so then you're looking at like auto-bounce city or difficult to penetrate city. I mean, look, 320, what? On the side, and the rear, a lot of the rear suddenly becomes an auto-bounce zone. So a lot of this armor is suddenly an auto-bounce, which is really nice. Now, that's interesting. It means you can tank with your rear, a bit like a KV-5. You can tank with your bum if you need to, and it's better off than trying to turn the whole tank around to face your opponent a lot of the time. From the top, your armor is freaking garbage, and artillery will have a field day. So that's why I recommended the super heavy spall liner earlier on. And the 10 degrees of gun depression is also quite nice. So angling this tank, I mean, if you angle it something like this, yeah, you can get some auto bounce zones. That's probably the best way to angle it. And from the rear, something like that is not a terrible idea. So that sort of angling is what you're looking at. So without further ado, let's go and take a look at a little bit of gameplay. Here's the game I wanted to show you, and you can see that it is a standard tier 6 game on the Siegfried line. Now the TOG's one of those funny tanks. It doesn't really care as much as a lot of heavy tanks about what the matchmaking is. You know, it doesn't, for strange, magical, mystical reasons, it doesn't get into tier 8 games. Wargaming decided this thing needed premium matchmaking. I am not going to complain, although I must confess I don't really understand the logic. Usually that's the case if you have a terrible gun, and the gun is one of the highlights of the TOG, but never mind. Whatever. You can immediately see that we are moving along at a blistering speed of 14 kilometers an hour if we're lucky. You can also really appreciate quite how long this tank is. You could basically use it as a landing strip. It is ridiculous. In contrast, there's a little ELC running around like a mad thing. So, we are going to move into the town because they have 2 artillery, and one thing that TOG does not like is artillery. Artillery makes TOG a very, very sad tank. Hello, little leopard. How are you today? Oh, no shot on leopard. That's very disappointing. Oh well. Right, so TOG is still not quite made it into the town yet. Leopard is still out there being irritating. I'm seeing if I can get some shots on that leopard. Probably not. Someone will probably kill him first. Probably a waste of time me even bothering. Oh, he's even behind a bit of hill. There we go. I didn't achieve anything. But we're slowly making our way to the town. Now the crew I have in this tank is fairly competent. They are the majority of the way through their second crew skill. They're my British heavy crew, so they're, you know, they're fairly good. Seeing as I have elited the Black Prince, I haven't bought the Carnarvon yet, but I've also got 2 premium tanks to train the crew up on, so the crew are fairly... The crew are fairly competent. That Cheeto gets wrecked by a KV-1S, and I just trundle forwards to teach these guys a lesson in manners. And we're being capped already. Wow. Now, I'm not going to drive straight through there because the KV-1S will just blatter 122mm shell into my face, and while the TOG has a lot of health and it can soak up more 122mm shells than anybody else at tier 6, that doesn't mean you want to invite them. Especially as we're in a town, so the KV-1S has all the space he needs to back off like a little coward rather than standing there and dying like a man. Seriously though, if you're driving a KV-1S and you come across a TOG, do not just sit there in front of him and trade shots. You will die. Use the fact that you can output a lot of damage and he has to rely on his rate of fire. Back off, because otherwise it's going to go horribly wrong. Right, well the base cap's up to 50 and I'm hoping someone does something about that. There we go, because I am not fast enough to. And we're winning 5-4 and I haven't actually fired a shot yet. Is this VK going to oblige me by coming round the corner? Come on, you know you want to. Come on. Ah, someone else kills him. We're winning 6-4. And there's someone else capping our base. And at this point, I believe, I decide to head back to our base because I don't think that ARL is going to last too long. And so here you can see the single worst thing about the TOG. It's ponderously slow speed. It is ridiculous. Ah well. There's a KV-1S and I really need to deal with this guy first. He doesn't aim his shot properly, gets a bounce, which is hilarious. It's always funny bouncing a KV-1S, especially in a TOG. And that shot's going to come back to haunt him later on. I set him on fire. And he burns to death. So I managed to kill that KV-1S without taking a single point of damage. Always good fun. And one of the best things you can do in a TOG is get a ram kill. Of course, you never do it by ramming someone else. I mean, you know, a country can dodge out of the way of a TOG, but ever so occasionally someone takes it upon themselves to ram you, and that's always hilarious, as they run straight into like 85 tons worth of ridiculously long British steel, and die. And you giggle with your massive health pool. So, our team's taking quite a lot of casualties, and we're trying to trundle back here to help them out. But you know, we're in a TOG, it's taking a while, and hello, Mr. Stewart. Goodbye, Mr. Stewart. There's kill number 2. It's a cheap kill, but you know what, a kill's a kill. Now, even though I'm in a ponderously slow machine, I still decided to head back to base, because that was the most useful thing I could do with my time. And sometimes you will find that's the most useful thing you can do with your time, even if you don't think you're going to get back there. If you're in a situation where you think you're going to lose if you do not drive back to your base, well, you'd better get driving back to your base then, because, well, otherwise you lose, and that's not really acceptable, if you can possibly avoid it. So I know there's an SU-100Y down there. I really don't want to take a shot from him, but I can't exactly dodge out of the way, especially because that didn't penetrate him, and ow, that hurt. But you can see I took the shot from him, and I still have almost 1,000 hit points left. And I'm going to reload long before he does. And he is dead, and I am on 3 kills. So, what's left? There's me, a T-34, and 2 artillery pieces on my side. And there's a T-150, an S-35CA, and 2 artillery pieces on the enemy side. And there was a hit from the enemy gorilla. Owie. That wasn't very nice. And I try and move out of the way, although this is a TOG, so it's not going to do it all that quickly. T-34, balls of steel, drives forwards. And there's their T-150 out on the field. Well, sort of on the field. Edge of town. So I'm trying to draw people's attention to him. And meanwhile trying to help this T-34 out. The thing is, he is rushing on ahead, and so it's very difficult for me to support him when he's just driving around like a mad thing. And I can only do 14 kilometers an hour, and I just got spotted, and I'm not in the town, so I am expecting artillery shells to start landing around me. Now, I have a spall liner on this thing for this very reason. In fact, it's a super heavy spall liner. S-35CA takes damage from me, and oh god, there's a T-150, right. T-150 is the mortal enemy of the TOG. That was a terrible shot. The T-150 does 300 average damage with its gun and has a lot of armour. The TOG's gun can still make a mess of a T-150. But, oh, that was a bad bounce. but a T-150 is not an opponent to be taken lightly. And that was also a bounce. I was trying to get his track there and keep him pinned out in the open. Now let's see if we can do something about this S-35. That was a bad miss. He fires. Hopefully I have time. One shot, back off. He's got 46 health left. That one misses. It looks like he might have missed me. And there we go. Kill number 4. And there's that T-150. He leaves me on 153 health. We track him. There's another shot into him. Trying to keep that pillar between myself and him. And there we go. We finish him off for kill number 5. And that just leaves their 2 artillery. Now I am only on 153 health. Woohoo! That one missed. And you can see, I took 5 shots this entire game and only bounced 1 shot, and that was very lucky. That was the KV-1S right at the beginning. If I hadn't bounced that KV-1S, I wouldn't have been able to kill the T-150 at the end. There's no guarantee any of the rest of our team would have been able to kill him. We might have lost. Our T-34's taken out the Bishop, and he's probably going to get to the grill before I get anywhere near there, if we're honest. I can't see me picking this up. I'm going to try. I will trundle forwards as fast as my ridiculously big tracks will carry me, but I'm probably not going to make it in time. Just imagine some nice elevator music in the background. Or possibly the really irritating music that you get on the phone when you're waiting for the bank to answer. And you're gradually getting more and more frustrated. But think of that in a more relaxed manner. This is the TOG, no need to get stressed. You have a swimming pool on board for that very reason. I really do love this tank. So much fun. Come on, can we get the artillery? Or is the T-34 just going to beat us to it? And unless the Griller can pull out an absolutely blinding display of amazingness, this game is ours. And we'll have carried it. There's the Griller. T-34 is moving in to kill the cricket. Sorry, for those that don't know, Griller is German for cricket. A lot of the German tanks seem to be named after animals. Griller gets a shot into the T-34 as he comes in, but T-34 is repaying the favour. Oh, and by the way, if anyone's watching who speaks German, I've probably horribly butchered that name. It's probably, I don't know, not the way I've said it, but whatever. Either way, there we go. T-34 kills him, and that was the game. And that, believe it or not, ended up being a mastery badge, Ace Tanker, which is nice. So, we'll just nip back to the garage for some concluding remarks once you've taken a look at the post-battle results screens. So what do I think about this tank overall? Well, as I've already said, it's not a very good tank. Let's just put that out there. On its own, it's a bit painful. In platoons, it's really good fun. I enjoy this tank. I have a lot of fun driving it. It's a good little money maker. It's a decent crew trainer. But I'm not going to go out there and tell you that this is the best tank in the world. You should definitely buy it. But I do have a lot of fun in it, and this is one of my favourite tanks, and is perhaps some of the best money I've ever spent on a computer game. It's an awful lot of fun, and I recommend it to those of you who are similarly inclined, though of course I don't know who that will apply to. But it is, in my opinion, a lot of fun. Not everyone thinks so, but I really like it. I think it has character, and I like that. I really do. And people, when you're playing it, seem to fall into extremes. One, they seem to think that you're a TOG, you're stupid, they don't like you for strange reasons. Possibly they try and get in your way and just generally dick about. And the others see the funny side. They think it's a hilarious machine that looks stupid, and they join in and have a bit of a laugh, and everyone's mood just kind of lifts, raises, and people don't take it too seriously. So yeah, I really like it, but I would struggle to recommend it to most players of this game. So yeah, there we go. I hope you found that review vaguely interesting and or useful, informative, you enjoyed it, whatever. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.